and welcome to Post Games, a podcast about why and how we love video games. I am your host, Chris Plant, and I am so happy to have you here during this wonderful time of the year in which darkness encroaches deeper and deeper into the early evening. Speaking of darkness, I can remember the very first time I tried wearing a VR headset. It was January 2015 at CES, and despite it being winter, I was sweating through my t-shirt, cooking inside a Las Vegas trailer alongside the body heat of dozens of other journalists from The Verge. Versions of the Oculus headset had appeared at the two prior CES shows, mostly as proof of concept, but this time was different. The kit, while hardly final, was legit, and it played actual games. Oculus, under Palmer Luckey, had corralled the support of a handful of investors and game developers, the latter of whom had cobbled together some pretty evocative scenes. So, after dabbing my head with paper towels, I pulled the headset over my eyes, and then I wielded an unofficial lightsaber. And all the while, I looked like a total buffoon, but I admit, I kinda sorta saw the appeal, even if every ounce of video game history told me to maintain ample skepticism about the pairing of the letters V and R. If you were to believe the hype on the CES show floor in 2015, this was the future. And to some degree, the hype was right, if only in that self-fulfilling sort of way that only Silicon Valley venture capital can be. From that day at CES 2015 until deep into the COVID-19 pandemic, virtual reality was inescapable in actual reality. Seminars and roundtables filled the halls of the Game Developers Conference. VR publishers hosted these decadent open bars alongside the Game Awards. When I took a break from games media to serve as a culture editor at The Verge, VR followed me to film festivals, particularly the Sundance Film Festival, where even a dinner atop a snow-covered mountain culminated with VR films that promised to channel empathy in ways that, quote, the theatrical experience could never muster. Of course, we live in 2025, 10 years after that demo, and we know how the future became the present. The Oculus Rift itself would become the MetaQuest and inspire billions of dollars of investment into the metaverse, and yet for a long time, they couldn't even figure out how to give the avatars feet. To say VR has not lived up to its investors' expectations would be an understatement of the decade. And so, the alternate world promised by Palmer Luckey, endorsed by billionaires, and hung like an albatross around the neck of many of the biggest tech companies on the planet, has been broadly replaced by new investor fixations, like crypto and artificial intelligence. But a funny thing has happened under the shadows of the tech companies. Small studios have created a cottage industry, not meant to scale at the level of a Meta or a Google, but something niche, appealing to a dedicated cohort of people who didn't want or need VR to change the world. They just wanted a fresh flavor of escapism. These dedicated VR fans have cycled through entire trends: rhythm games, first-person shooters, chat rooms. The games that launched VR, trips to colossal open spaces far from the confines of our apartments, have given way to stranger experiences, some downright counter to the expectations of the form. Which gets us to this week's episode. I was confounded when I first saw Cave Crave, a VR game in which the player squeezes through dark tunnels, the gaps so tight that the character must hold their breath, causing red, dim light to pulse, as if you are sensing your character's lungs emptying, and you begin to see the blood vessels in your own eyes. But that isn't even the scariest part. This week on Post Games, a trip into a real cave that became a tomb. Act 1, the VR game that traps you in a tight, dark hole. Act 2, how a YouTube tragedy video inspired the recreation of a closed cave. A very special Patreon bonus. And, of course, Act 3, the news of the week. A heads up before we go any further. In this episode, I talk with my guest about the risks of caving, and specifically one tragic incident that led to a man's death. I really appreciated this conversation. I think we touch on the uncomfortableness of things like true crime and how real tragedies can inspire works of art. But I want you to know what you're getting to before you step into the darkness. And with that, let's get to it. It is a new year and you want to eat better, but you still have no time to work with. You have no energy. You have so much going on in your life. Oh, what do? You do Factor. 2 minutes, real food, and you are done. You're not failing at eating healthy. You're failing at having 3 extra hours in every night. You're failing at not being a chef and wanting to do cleanup. Factor takes care of that. It has delicious food that is good for you. You got lean proteins, colorful veggies, whole food ingredients, and none of the yucky stuff, no refined sugars, no artificial sweeteners. It will offer you whatever you need to match your lifestyle. For me, Mediterranean diet, it really works well. But maybe you need something else, like a high-protein diet or GLP-1 support or ready-to-eat salads. Whatever it is, Factor wants to meet you on your page. Always fresh, never frozen, and like I said, ready in 2 minutes with no prep, no cleanup, just chill. I use Factor. I think that you should too. Head to factormeals.com/postgames, 50 off, and use code postgames50 to get 50% off your first Factor box, plus free breakfast for a year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscriptions purchase. Make healthier eating easy with Factor. Today's guest is Piotr Symacz. He is the CEO of 3R Games, a Polish studio with a focus on virtual reality. The team released its latest game, Cave Crave, early this summer. In the confines of a virtual reality headset, players explore fictional caves in which gnarly spiders and cave critters stalk the player through disorienting, pitch-black tunnels. This fall, the studio released its first free expansion to Cave Crave, a recreation of the actual Nutty Putty cave located in Eureka, Utah. The Nutty Putty experience is a tourist mode. It doesn't continue the main game, rather, it provides an alternative experience. The developers have removed the menacing monsters and elaborate serpentine tunnels. In their place, players find little remnants of past visitors, like cassette tapes and maps that provide historical context and helpful guidance through the cave's extremely narrow passageways. The experience is informative, if not a bit slow, the sort of thing that you would expect to find in a science museum. And yet, one detail adds more terror than a million fictional creepy crawlies. The Nutty Putty Cave, in real life, is a tomb. On November 24th, 2009, 26-year-old John Edward Jones, his brother, and some friends entered the Nutty Putty Cave, which had been a popular local destination since being first explored in the 1960s. Previous cavers, including Boy Scout troops, college students, and experienced spelunkers, had mapped much of the cave, including a tight but passable area called the Birth Canal. Jones at some point became separated from his group. Believing he'd reached the Birth Canal, he accidentally entered an extremely narrow and unmapped gap. Unable to turn around, Jones pushed forward, becoming stuck upside down within a vertical fissure 10 by 18 inches wide. Despite a 28-hour rescue effort, the young man died trapped in the cave. the passageway so tight that his remains could not be recovered. So, local officials agreed shortly after the incident to plug the cave with cement. The Nutty Putty cave remains sealed 16 years later. The Cave Crave recreation of Nutty Putty isn't explicitly ghoulish. You won't find human remains. In fact, the fissure in which Jones became trapped is inaccessible to the player. And the bulk of the audio dialogues detailed the cave's fascinating history, which existed long before that tragic November day. And yet, the reality of what happened at Nutty Putty Cave is ever present. I wanted to learn why a game composer turned video game studio head in Poland would recreate a closed cave halfway across the world, why VR players would choose to put themselves into claustrophobic spaces, and what attracts people to recreations and retellings of real-life tragedies. Because this experience in Cave Crave, it is merely a node in the Nutty Putty legacy. In 2016, filmmakers adapted the John Jones story into the Christian drama The Last Descent, and every single year, the Jones story is recounted in countless YouTube videos, many with millions of views. What attracts us to darkness? Figuratively and literally. Let's find out. How did you learn about the Nutty Putty incident?
I found it through some YouTube videos when I was going through some crazy accidents or strange deaths compilation, something like I imagine many people were doing when they learned about the accident for the first time. And it really shook me emotionally. I couldn't stop thinking how hard it must have been to be there, how hard it must have been on the rescue team also. And of course, I believe it's only natural you start to wondering how would I behave in a similar situation. And these thoughts were going around my head for a few days, and I kinda went down a rabbit hole of reading and learning everything I could about the accident, about the Nutty Putty cave, because this cave was a really popular site years before the accident.
Were you familiar with caving before this?
Not in a way of crawling into very tight tunnels. In my background, I've entered game development through the kitchen door because I'm a game composer. And many years back, I was scoring the underground tour in a silver mine. Of course, it's a very old silver mine. It's a touristic site next to my city. And I also participated in a technical implementation of the speakers, cables, and so on. So we were crawling in the mud, in the tight tunnels, and it was creepy. However, you still had this extra few inches above you to inhale and feel. I've never really felt overwhelmed. Later, I have visited a few caves with my daughter, but I've always kept to the roots when you're following the guide. Of course, my daughter, crazy teenager, was all about, yeah, let's go the tightest tunnel. And the guide assured us it was safe, and she's still with us playing Roblox next room.
Why then did you feel this intense desire to recreate this cave then?
I was in this phase of learning everything about caving and inhaling and discovering there are tens, if not hundreds, of very interesting caving stories. And I think it's important to underline, not all of these stories end tragically. Many of them end in a very uplifting, even inspiring way. There are wonderful people with great courage fighting for lives of other people, sometimes lost in the dark because of lack of experience, sometimes, of course, of sheer stupidity, but that's life. And I was really amazed how determined were many rescuers described in, of course, YouTube videos. And I couldn't believe I would be so determined in such horrid conditions. So I was learning everything about caving, and we were also in this phase as a company that we were looking for new game ideas. And our company provides VR games. And with VR, it's mostly about interacting with the world around you. And 99% of game developers reach out to recreate fictional worlds or very big open spaces, because very big open spaces is what impresses you the most, especially when you are a fresh VR user. Because you're sitting in your room is like probably 2 by 2 meters, or I know you've got yards in US.
I live in California, so not really.
Yeah, okay, but you get it. And then you enter some VR game, and you're in a giant desert, and there's this giant monster you need to fight. And it's always like, for newbies, wow, it's so big and so on. And the main fun factor is the open nature of the world. So you can go anywhere, you can jump really high, you can run very fast and so on. And I was like, if everyone's doing it this way, opening the world for the player, what would come out if we went the opposite route? Like, close and tighten the world around you to the point that you will constantly feel like your real lungs are fighting with your panic-inducing environment for breath.
The claustrophobia of a VR headset is typically described as a negative, but here it seems to be the point. Like, there are points in the cave in this game where you can barely see inches ahead of you, and the screen is pulsing red because of your lack of oxygen. And it's an extremely uncomfortable experience, and yet thousands of people have sought this out. So what about it draws people in? It is not traditionally fun, or it's anxiety-inducing, not releasing.
One of the key selling points of virtual reality as an entertainment technology is to provide you with a safe way of experiencing something you would never do in your real life, because you're aware of the consequences. So that's the first thing. So many people who probably read about Nutty, Putty, or overall spelunking decided, I might not want to do it in a real life, but here, in a safe environment of switching off my headset where I feel it's enough, I feel this is what's really scratching this itch of, do I really need an underground adventure? I don't know. I never felt I do, but somehow it's now available. Why not? But the factor number 2 is also the reason why we've divided the game into the different modes. Because it's, again, obvious and natural when people are hearing about the game and the whole idea of moving really slow, not seeing forward, you naturally gravitate to this conclusion, okay, so it's a horror game. So there will be like spider or the cave monkey jumping at you. I knew it right away when planning the game. I didn't want to flatten the experience, to make it like one-dimensional. But of course, as we were testing the game with our Discord community, people were immediately, okay, this is nice, but give me big spiders, give me zombies, and so on and so on. And I was like, okay, this is interesting, but we're not really going to do it. So we've added an additional horror mode. Again, it's not a simple horror game in terms of simply enjoying the exploration of underground world. Your mind really feels it. It's you and your thoughts. When I was creating the soundtrack, I didn't want to make it very rhythmic to avoid getting you in trance. I didn't want to make it very scary, because that would be, again, flattening the experience and suggesting you participating in some horror. I didn't want to make it very uplifting. I just wanted to provide some musical feel of wonder and mystery, because there are maps that people find, or even places that people find scary, and the same places are found by another players as relaxing. And that's exactly what I felt when I was visiting caves myself. I found that it was my thoughts that were making the environment around me crushing or scary, but sometimes just standing for 30 seconds in a completely dark corridor with silence and water dropping and just your thoughts, sometimes it felt relaxing. This is also the factor behind people trying to visit this underground world recreated in VR. It's in many percent of the gameplay fun, it's up to you. How do you perceive this world and how do you find yourself in this world?
Which came first, the idea to recreate the Nutty Putty cave or Cave Crave itself?
No, the Nutty Putty came the last because I was pretty sure that even there was an idea, let's go with the Nutty Putty as first cave, we wouldn't be able to do it. When we were trying early prototypes, I think it's also a fun fact to share, my team wasn't convinced at all to make this game. We had no tool set and we had no know-how how to create believable caving environments. They were mostly against it because the gameplay seemed really slow, really not saturated with action, probably boring and so on. But we pushed through and we ended up with technology and know-how to provide believable environments. And then when the game was already in store and people were mostly liking it, I wanted to develop the tourist mode because we had this idea of digitizing the real environments from the very beginning. Because it was the real places that inspired me to make this game. But the thing is, we're a small company, and to provide a believable recreation of the place that's still accessible in real world, and to make it like full-fledged thing, like 100% honest, you would need to LiDAR scan it, and you would need to go into expensive technical means we have no idea about and we have no budget to invest into. So naturally, I was going through the web and I was looking for the caves that were already mapped. And of course, I reached for Nutty Putty because it was my very first encounter with US spelunking, the whole spelunking world. And then, when I was reading about Brandon Collis, I found his blog and I found so many people asked him the same questions for many years since the accident. He decided to create a blog and answer them. And I read the blog, and then after reading it, I found he mapped the cave. So the official cave map was available in his map shop on his site. So I tried to reach Brandon in every channel I could find through every caving spelunking group I was able to get into. And I was successful. We've talked with Brandon, and it turned out Brandon had not only this map, but also additional cave data. Luckily for us, the cave was also documented by many people before the accident, because it was just a very popular hiking or sightseeing place. So we've used this public documentation. We were recreating this, the corridors, the colors, the level of humidity, and so on. The cave is around 85-90% accurate with the real thing. So we've recreated Nutty Putty because it was already mapped, because we had access to the files, because Brandon was willing to help us, and it was really super valuable because he was there and so on. And of course, because I'm not really trying to avoid this narrative, because this cave was the most infamous cave that really made me thinking about creating this VR activity. And of course, it attracts people's attention. So there's no avoiding this topic of marketing value this cave has. However, because right away there were people who were jumping the wagon of, oh, you're monetizing John John's death. We've also agreed on letting people get close to the place when he just ended, but we blocked it to avoid people crawling very deep into. And I mean, you know what streamers are capable of for getting clicks. There's a note that this was the place. It's wonderfully narrated also by Brandon. And that's it. That's the reason behind Nutty Putty.
You mentioned that challenge of wanting to focus on this because it is going to attract some attention, but also wanting to be respectful about it. For me, what it reminds me of is true crime is very popular. And by true crime stories like serial killers, things like that, these tragedies that also people are like naturally gravitated to. And you mentioned at the beginning, you first came across this when you were seeing all these videos that were also about these tragic incidents. What do you think it is that is so compelling to people about a moment like this? Like, why, despite its tragedy, are they so gravitated to it?
I think I've partially answered it when I've mentioned I found myself wondering, what would I do if it was me? Because people have this innate natural ability of imagining themselves as somebody else. And I think, why do we like horrors or true crime movies? Because if it were totally abstract, it probably wouldn't be so attractive to people. But when you have this back of your head feeling that this thing really happened and that it might happen to you or your neighbor, it really gives you probably some adrenaline kick. Maybe not in a direct way, but on a pure physiological level, you feel stimulated, not directly, but you definitely feel so. I also remember this one gimmick that every cave guide does. And when I was talking with the game community on Reddit, it turned out that every cave guide does it in every country, in every cave. So the gimmick is you're leading your party deep into the cave, and then you're turning off the flashlight, leaving everybody in a complete darkness. Some guides like to do it for 10 seconds, some for 30 seconds, some for a minute. Some still try to talk to their parties left in the darkness, and some are just silent. Most of them, but probably not all, give you a warning. And the first thing that comes to everybody's mind is, come on, turn it off, man. Of course I know the way back. And nobody knows the way back. And again, you're entering this case in real life. You're very safely following the steps of your guide. You can watch teenagers. There are always teenagers in this group. They are so bored. Man, so boring. Rocks, stones, blah. And then he turns off the light, and when he turns it on again, everybody's like, man, it was something. Having this ability to imagine yourself in this similar situation is what provides some stimulus to people who probably feel safe in their everyday environment. The term of safety is so wide. If you have this place you can go back to, even if it's a one-room rented flat, and you have water running, you have light, you have a wardrobe with dry clothes, and so on, you might say that comparing to the caving environments, it's a pretty safe environment. So maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's why people are looking for, are even sometimes digging and actively looking for more horror movies, horror stories, caving stories, accidents compilations, and so on.
When you imagine a player who is now deep in this cave, what is the emotion that you're wanting them to feel while they're in it?
Sense of wonder and exploration. When I was starting as a gamer, my favorite genres was always adventure games and RPGs. There's a wonderful tool online when you can examine yourself what kind of gamer you are. It's called Bartle's Gaming Typology or something like this. I've done it and it turned out I'm an explorer. So I'm always wondering what will be the next chamber or the next island I will travel to. And I've discovered that with environments that are so tight, every corridor going left or right is like entering new chamber. That's why some people with our game are playing with a very far but narrow flashlight radius. They want to see 5 or 7 meters forward without watching the closest environment. I always play the opposite. I love the idea of the world materializing before me. And also, it works to our benefit as game designers that, like I mentioned before, these environments are so irregular that you as a player sometimes had no idea that you're rediscovering the same place for a third or fifth time.
Can you tell people a little bit about Brandon Koalas and like his connection to Nutty Putty and why he was the person to work with?
Yeah, Brandon Koalas is a very experienced spelunker / caver. He's also a rescuer and he participated in many rescue actions. If I'm not wrong, he was rescuing Boy Scouts from Nutty Putty before John's accident 2 or 3 times prior to the accident. Brandon was also, again as far as I remember, the last member of the rescue team from 2009 who went very deep to the end of Nutty Putty route when John Jones was stuck to check on his condition. And as far as I remember, he was the last man to witness John fading from life to death. He has a vast caving experience. He was participating as one of many rescue team members during these tragic events in 2009. And I've read that he went there and it was very hard to get to John's, not only because you needed to know the cave, because why Jones got stuck there? He just mistakenly went into the route he took for another route, that one that was already known and safe. And the tight narrowings of Nutty Putty were at times so tight that only smaller team members were physically available to reach John Jones.
Did you end up speaking with anybody from John Jones's family about the project?
No. I was thinking about it, but I haven't. I haven't tried to reach them. My mindset behind Nutty Putty and virtualizing Nutty Putty is, for most of the people online, of course, Nutty Putty is John's story. Because, of course, the cave surfaced or resurfaced in media on his story or through his story. But as we've talked with Brandon, John's story is a part of the cave story. It's not the whole cave story. When I approached Brandon for the first time, it was also my mindset not to build the whole sightseeing experience around Brandon remembering the rescue process, but more of providing the cave in a touristic way and to mention John's story in a close to the place when he physically was finally left.
You've made a game that is broken into two parts, and there is the very clear horror mode with spiders and scares, and then you've made the tourist mode, but while Nutty Putty has moments of awe, it can also have its own horror or terror. For you, what is the difference between those two types of horror?
If I got you correctly, you felt that Nutty Putty experience could be very scary to some players. I think it's really subjective because for me personally, there aren't any super scary moments at Nutty Putty. Maybe if you take into consideration the cave's history, that might work with your imagination more. So I would draw the division line between what's happening in your head when you imagine yourself against these tight places, also taking historical context in your mind, and then real physical threat.
Thank you so much for joining us. Very quick, can you tell people where they can find Cave Crave if they want to go play it?
Yeah, of course. Cave Crave is available for you at MetaQuest Store. It's also available for you if you're using PSVR 2 headset through Sony Store. Actually, it's great we're talking today because 3 hours ago, Nutty Putty update has just dropped into PSVR 2. But the idea is that Sony will be getting everything that Quest gets. And also the last thing is in a month or 2 months tops, I believe the game will be also available on Steam for PVR players. It will also have the same content as Quest. I think it's the best experience in terms of visuals, but the whole fun is the same.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your invitation, for reaching out. Wonderful.
Welcome to the Patreon bonus section, the history of the Steam machine and the computers that we want to keep under our living room TVs. If you are a Patreon subscriber, I will tell you all about the 15 or so years that Valve has spent building towards this console-like machine that could give Sony and Microsoft a run for their money. And if you're not a subscriber, that's totally cool too, because we have plenty more show. We have the news of the week, in which I dive deep into another Valve announcement. You'll hear about it in just a moment. So, with all of that said, let's split up. Act 3, the news of the week. Valve announced its second attempt of the Steam machine, a half-a-foot tall cube that is 6 times faster than a Steam Deck and threatens to bring the huge libraries and constant sales of PC gaming to the living room. I spoke at length about it in the Patreon bonus section, getting into the nearly 15-year effort to make this tiny hunk of metal, wire, and rare earth metals into a reality. So I want to use this space instead to talk about Valve's other announcement. A new VR headset. And wait, don't run away. I promise that this is interesting, even if you have been skeptical of VR after years of crummy meta products and absurdly expensive competitors. And I know we've been talking a lot about VR in this episode, but stick with me, because the Steam Frame headset does 2 very important things. It plays normal games locally, and it streams games without wires or unreliable Wi-Fi. So let's get into each and why they matter. First, normal games. The Frame runs on an ARM chip, roughly as powerful as the most up-to-date smartphone. With that power, it can play Steam games directly from the device. Basically, think of the Steam Frame as a Steam Deck, except you can strap it to your face. I think, as strange as it is to say those words, this is pretty smart, and frankly, what most people want. Not a complicated VR experience that requires them to map their room, and they wind up busting their shin on the furniture, but an escape from a stressful surrounding, like a sleep mask, where you can play Stardew Valley. Now, the other thing. Playing VR games that require a lot of computing power on a VR headset has long come with a convenience cost. At first, you needed to connect your face to your PC with these long wires, perfect for tripping over while you are blindfolded. Then players could stream games, but it relied on their own Wi-Fi, which I don't know about y'all, but I trust my Wi-Fi zilch to run games seamlessly, especially games that induce nausea if they stutter whatsoever. The frame connects to the PC via a dongle that streams directly over a 6 GHz spectrum, and the early impressions of it are glowing. So, you could play a game like Half-Life Alyx without the wires, without the stutter. That sounds pretty damn nice. And on top of all of this, it's lighter than the Meta Quest 3, the PSVR 2, and the Apple Vision Pro. It has half the weight of Valve's own Index headset. Will this popularize VR gaming? No, of course not. But it was always a mistake to assume that VR would simply become the most dominant way of playing video games overnight, or even in a decade. If VR is to survive, its growth will need to be like so many other things, incremental. VR headset makers will need to win players over, not by telling them what they want, but by listening, testing, and providing players what they actually love. Some other quick tidbits. Weeks ago, Rockstar fired over 30 employees citing leaks of company information. The employees who were organizing a union claimed the move was union busting. Chris Bratt made a great interview video for People Make Games. I'll link that in the show notes. And it seems like the issue is beginning to catch mainstream attention. This week, British MP Christine Jardine brought attention of the firings to the UK Parliament. Quote, "I have written to Rockstar and asked for information on the issue, but I wondered if I can have a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss what steps can be taken to support these affected employees." Around the same time, a letter signed by 220 staff members at the Edinburgh-based Rockstar requested the reinstatement of the fired employees. And lastly, a good thing to send you on your way, more egg. Listener Thomas noted that last week's 2 egg games, Egg and Evil Egg, have a third companion. Egging On is another platformer in which you play as a delicate and adorable egg. It is a bit friendlier and colorful than last week's Dark Souls-like egg game, but that is 3 egg games in 1 month. In the rules of journalism, 3 makes a trend. Welcome to the egg era. And that is the news of the week. Friends, we exit the deaths slightly different than we entered them. Will we ever return? I don't know. Next week, though, it's all brightness. I have one of my favorite episodes so far. The first annual Post Games Thanksgiving special. Halloween and Christmas specials get all the love. Maybe it's the grotesque origins of the Thanksgiving holiday that spoil the vibe, or perhaps it's been bullied into irrelevance by its corporate companions Black Friday and Cyber Monday. But the core of Thanksgiving, taking a moment to show gratitude to family, friends, and strangers alike, is profound, is beautiful, and should be preserved. Celebration of goodness is a mighty counter to our daily instinct to doom scroll and anxiety spiral. So, to help me begin a post-games holiday tradition, nearly 20 special guests will take a brief break from the world's chaos to share what about video game culture they are thankful for. A game, a person, a store, a movement. I have cried twice while editing it, so bring some tissues. Now, a reminder. Post-game supporters get the show and the newsletter early on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern. They get extra acts and bonus materials. Plus, each month, subscribers get a video in the ongoing series, Video Game Journalism 101. The most recent episode is all about storytelling. You don't need to know about journalism or media or even video games to appreciate this one. This video explains why you have that deep urge to share what has happened to you and to hear what has happened to others. And no ads on anything. Subscribe to the Patreon at patreon.com/postgames. Subscribe to the newsletter for free at post.games and get all of the show notes. Post Games logo by James Barham, theme by Mark Sparling, and a special thank you to this week's guest, Piotr Sumach. Like the show, leave a review on Apple or Spotify, or share the show with a friend. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week.